piano. Perhaps you too, on memorable occasions, have come under its spell. Its power at times seems magical. Does the piano have a rival in the world of art that can so easily lift and even transport us? Thousands of inspired and energetic musicians have explored the musical and emotional possibilities of the piano, only to discover they are limitless. Perhaps you are interested in some musical excursions of your own. If so, the Piano for Life series is designed just for you. We promise it won't be anything like what you might expect. Those who have traveled the farthest in the enchanted world of the piano have left us some pretty good directions. Not just for the professionals, but for all of us. Let's take a look. Maybe we can make it much farther than we ever imagined.
Hi, I'm Mark Almond, and I will be your host for the Piano for Life series. Thank you for joining us. We hope this series enables you to build an ideal foundation for your future progress as an accomplished pianist. Our goal has always been to present a complete and balanced approach, in harmony with traditional instruction, and yet at the same time incorporating insights and recommendations from the greatest pianists in history. Many of the great pianists were also great teachers, and they are the ultimate authorities on learning to play the piano. Some of their recommendations will surprise you. Now, before we begin, allow me to show you just a few things at the keyboard so we can stay together during the upcoming lessons. Let's look at this chord sequence. This is typical of what pianists do, a very simple pattern, and yet all kinds of ways we can play it. My thumb is on F, and I'll say something about the names of the keys in just a few minutes. Skip a white key each time, and you heard me break it from the top to the bottom, the highest pitch to the lowest pitch. In fact, I broke it twice before I moved it right next door. Here's the same pattern with the white keys right below each of the ones we just played. Again, it moves. The same problem for the hand exactly. Now what we do is we expand on patterns like these just to intimidate people and make it look like we're geniuses. Here we go, same exact chord in the left hand with the F on the bottom, every other white key. Now when we start amplifying or expanding what we're doing, there's all kinds of possibilities. Somebody may play this chord with the left hand. Lots of notes, but it all came from that pattern. Here it is again. Both hands have the same chord. Sounds very complicated, very interesting musically, but look what it came from. Now this is a symbol. This is an example of the entire series of lessons. Yes, later on we will look at efficient ways of reading music, traditional sight reading, but first we're going to build a foundation of understanding what's going on the keyboard in terms of the patterns. We will look at simple building blocks that set us up to understand all of the chords that come in the future as we get to the more complex chords. Now, I will be using the pedal. You see how that sustains the sound? It holds it for as long as I want it until I play the next chord. Then, of course, it has to come up or else the old chord will clash with the new chord. Now, if I play something off of your screen, off of your television screen or computer screen, it always makes sense with the chord we're using at the time. We're designing all of these lessons as private lessons, so even I don't know what I'm going to do next. I'll just teach just like I'm teaching a class, and hopefully we can keep the screen, we can keep the view of the keyboard compatible with what I'm playing. But if not, if I play something off of your screen, it always makes sense with the chord pattern. And that's actually a good example of the principle to keep in mind, that you will not be able to see all of the details. Remember when I played the broken pattern? That's way too fast to see what's happening, but you know what notes I'm using because I've already shown you the chord pattern. And that's how it'll always work. If something happens too quickly to see the details, you will still understand by the chord structure we're working on at the time, you will still know what notes are being played. Now, if I use a fingering where I curl my fingers under to show you that I'm playing a 3-note chord, that doesn't mean it's a good idea to play that way, unless you're teaching someone and you want to emphasize that you're playing a 3-note chord. But if you're actually playing, a relaxed hand position is the best, and you'll see that if I make some exceptions as an instructor, you'll notice as you watch me play that it won't be that way. Now, I will play some tunes all the way through. I always get complaints from students that say we never get to hear a song all the way through. You always stop and interrupt the music and teach something. So I will put at the end of some of the videos or your CD-ROM or whatever form you're watching, I will put some entire pieces, and perhaps I even will put some in where you can watch the hands. Now the last point is, if you know your key names, you will be able to stay up with everything we do. If you don't have instant recognition of the names of the keys, you will struggle. You'll have a hard time keeping up until they become automatic. Now that's not hard to do. We're not going to do it for you. But remember, there are 8 A's on the piano and they're all in the same place. And when you look at it, there's only 7 white keys to learn. B's all look the same. They're all above 3. And most of you know this, but if you don't have instant recognition, if you have to count up from A to find your C or find your D, because they are in alphabetical order, but if you're dependent on alphabetical order, then you will have trouble keeping up until each white key is an individual, until it becomes a friend of yours, and you recognize that it has a physical appearance all its own if you look at the black keys. Refer each white key to its position against the black keys. Only F's can be below the 3 blacks. And each white key is similar. They all have unique positions. Now the black keys are a little bit harder to make automatic because they borrow their names from 2 white keys. This black key can be a C sharp because it's up from the C, or it can be called a D flat. And don't take for granted, even if you played for a while or had lessons, don't take for granted that you know all your black keys without hesitation. I played for a long time. I'm embarrassed to say how long, but when I came back to the piano in my late teens, I played for a long time, almost 2 years, before I realized that this black key could be called A sharp. I always thought of it in terms of B flat. But each black key has 2 names, and it will cause a problem if I say play an E flat chord, and you have to stop and think about, well, where is E flat at? Yeah, it's down from E, but can you picture it as the upper of the 2 blacks as soon as I say E flat? Or if I say D sharp, same picture, upper of the 2 blacks. So that will take some work. Do that on your own if you need to. If not, you will be able to follow everything we do. There's no problem understanding the patterns that we will be learning. So try some of these key names if you need to. If not, our next session will be an overview of how music works. Now listen as I play a familiar tune with just my right hand. Now, the melody note alone isn't very satisfying. We have to add harmony notes or supporting tones that enhance the melody. My left hand is going to add a 3-note chord we call a triad because it has 3 notes in it. Now, we're not trying to learn this particular song at this point in time. We want a general picture, a bird's eye view of how every song works. In other words, any song can be played in terms of its melody, a single note melody played somewhere on the keyboard, and a supporting triad or 3-note chord that gives it its character. Now notice the chord or the triad doesn't change as often as the melody note. In fact, this song has 3 or 4 melody notes before there's a chord change. Now this song is interesting. It has 6 chords, but actually they're all the same chord. That doesn't make sense yet. In the next lesson, it'll make perfect sense to you. I'm not trying to teach you these chords right now. Don't be afraid. I don't move this quickly. Actually, I'm showing you that 3-note chords moving around the piano slowly is how every song works. It really doesn't matter what notes I'm playing right now. Now, another thing, the chord itself explains everything that happens at the keyboard. It explains what your left hand is doing. It explains what your right hand is doing. Let me give you 2 examples. Here's the same exact chord in 2 places. My right hand has the same 3-note chord that my left hand has. They're both based on the C. See, I'm trying to work the melody above these as I play both of them. I'm playing the exact same chords at the same time. So the expanded patterns on the keyboard with lots and lots of notes are always just the same chord played in more places. I can play these same 3 notes, or I could even start as low as I want to on the piano, and you won't be able to see the bottom ones here. I just played 3 keys, 1 chord in many places. Likewise, if I want to add to the song we're using as an example, if I want to add the low notes or bass notes, they also come from the chord. I'm going to take this C and play it double, 2 of them, and then get the chord quickly. See, with the D chord, I put 2 Ds in the bass and then went quickly to the D chord with the left hand to get a fuller, bigger sound. The other thing that knowing these chords helps us play more aggressively with stronger, more confident rhythms. The hesitation, the breaks in playing come when you're reading music notation and there's so many individual details, all the notes are considered separately. That's a much bigger obstacle when it comes to playing with confidence or playing without hesitation. Chord patterns are in groups. They're easy to understand. As soon as you get a handle on them physically and mentally, you can play songs without hesitation. It completely transforms the sound of the playing. And of course, when you move on to read music notation and you already have the chords in your mind and in your hands, you see familiar patterns everywhere, so that then you're able to read notation without hesitation. But it's based on the skill of knowing the chords. Now in our next session, we're going to look at the actual chords themselves, how they're built on 2 simple building blocks. We'll learn to understand music in terms of foundation harmony.
I can never thank my mother enough for the splendid start she gave me in my early musical life. She was a wonderful woman and a veritable genius as a teacher. There is one thing in particular for which I am everlastingly grateful to her. Before I was taught anything of notes or of the piano keyboard, she took me aside one day and explained in the simple and beautiful tongue which only a mother employs in talking to her child, the wonderful natural relationships of tones used in making music. I have since come to consider this the most important and yet the most neglected step in music education.
Can you play 2 keys at the keyboard and leave 3 keys in between them? 3 keys that are unplayed. You'll see right here I have a C and an E, but if you count carefully and count the black keys, which is the most important thing, that you count them equally, there are 3 keys in between these 2 notes. Let's do the same exact distance, or interval we call it, between D and the F sharp. There are 3 keys in between these, so again, it causes kind of a bright sound. It creates kind of a happy mood. This is one of our main building blocks for all of harmony, and we're going to describe it, we're going to name it for now according to its mood. Let's call it a bright interval. It's a bright distance. This distance, no matter where we do it, let's start on a black key. And I'm going to skip 3 keys so that I have 3 keys in between the 2 I'm playing. This is a bright interval on B flat. B flat's the bottom note. Let's do it on A. You see, it does matter that there are 3 keys in between them, but it doesn't matter whether they're black keys or white keys. Now, our other important building block is similar, except there are 2 keys between them. Now, believe it or not, these 2 building blocks are responsible for the entire structure of harmony. We can start building chords like crazy, even the complicated chords, based on these 2 building blocks. Here it is. Here's the darker sounding one. This has kind of a serious mood to it. I'm starting on C. I'm skipping over 2 keys to get the dark interval. Here's a dark interval with 2 white keys employed. Here's a dark interval with 2 black keys, but again there's 2 white ones in between them. Those are the foundation component parts to all of harmony, believe it or not. In fact, let's use them right now to build the most common chord that we use all the time, the major chord. Let's start on C and do a bright interval first, and then a dark interval. So see, they're piled on top of each other, but it's bright, dark. This is the most common, most frequently used of all chords in all of harmony. Now the next one that we frequently use, and we use it all the time, is the minor chord. We use them almost, maybe as much as the major chords, and it's a similar structure in a way. It uses both of our component building blocks, but it's dark, bright. So the reverse formula. This means we can build major chords and minor chords right away on any key, even on black keys. Here's one that's an oddball in terms of how the black keys come into play. Here's B. Major would be bright, dark. So it has 2 black keys. Once you learn a chord, you have it forever. They never ever change. B major will always have these 2 black keys. So we will become accustomed to employing black keys all of the time because it's irrelevant whether they're black or white once you see the structure. Now there's 2 infrequently used chords. We don't use them all the time. We use them occasionally. Their structures are even simpler than the common chords, the major and the minor, which we use all the time. The first one we'll look at is diminished. Start on B, do the dark and another dark. If you look closely, I have two dark intervals piled on top of each other with B at the bottom. This is B diminished. Well, all diminished chords work exactly the same. C diminished. Skip 2 keys for your dark interval, skip 2 keys for your dark interval, and you have C diminished. It employs 2 black keys. Now later we're going to see, this is one way of looking at it and a very effective, efficient way of looking at it to get off to a fast start. We will learn the official names, the theory names later, but one way of looking at it too is, let's go back to the major chord, and you'll see that it's very closely related to the other 3. Now I haven't shown you the 4th one yet, but look at C major. To find the minor from the major, you just move the middle key down to reverse the formula to get the dark bright we needed. Now look at major again. If I drop both of these, I get dark dark. Now the last one, let's go back to major, and we're going to raise this up 1 pitch, and what we have now is the augmented chord. Again, it's closely related to the major chord, as all of them are, but this one is bright, bright. So, without trying to remember each chord I'm showing you, we're just looking at the actual structure that we're going to build from in order to get all of these. See, we will start learning them as we need them to make music. A lot of times when you learn a brand new song, you only have to learn 1 or 2 new chords. And that's our strategy, to know how they're built, and then we will start learning them as we need them. So the augmented chord, bright, bright, can be built anywhere. Here it is on D. Skip 3 to get the bright interval, skip 3 more. Now let's take these on your own. Try building just the bright interval in different places. Try after that building the dark interval in different places, keeping 2 keys in between them, just to get the idea. Then build a major chord anywhere you want with any key at the root. Do your bright interval, then your dark interval. Practice a few of those in different places. Don't try and remember them, just get the idea of the structure. Then try your minor chord by building dark, bright. Then try your diminished chord. Let's start on D this time. Diminished chord is dark, dark. It has kind of an eerie sound. The last one is the augmented chord. Augmented because it stretches out a little bit. Start on D and go bright, bright. So without trying to remember them, just get these building blocks placed accurately. See if you can build all 4 kinds of the basic triads, because believe me, this is the foundation that we can take off from. You can harmonize any song of any type of music with just these 4 triads. Even though we will be learning how to build them anywhere we want to, anywhere we need to, the 4 triads give a very satisfying sound when we start to accompany or enhance melodies. Now, in your chord booklet, you have a chord progression that's described as random. It's very flexible. Let's look at the D minor chord with our dark, bright intervals to give us minor with D at the root. The other chord in this progression is B flat, one of the other chords. Starting on B flat, down from B, bright, dark, because it's major. Again, G minor, dark, bright, A major, bright, dark, as majors always are. Now the chord symbols themselves are very simple. In fact, it's very condensed language. The major chords, like the A major we just played, the major chords are simply capital letters. When we want the minor, we add the M. For the D minor chord, you'll see the D, M. M meaning minor, making it a dark, bright structure. Now, the actual order these chords are played in, if we took the time to write out for you all the possibilities, it would take page after page and it would look very frightening. So what we're going to do is give you just a few examples, and then you can experiment with the order they're played in. If you start with the D minor chord and end with the D minor chord, it doesn't matter what order you play the other chords in. You can go from D minor right to the G minor, from the D minor to the B flat major. It doesn't matter how they're played. And once you're on those chords, you can go anywhere you want. But it really won't sound over or ended until you're back on D minor. Now, some of the musical possibilities, we're going to use the pedal, the sustain pedal, to get a nice smooth sound. So start a little quieter. Beginners tend to play harshly, and the piano is already a percussion or a percussive instrument. So if you're playing and you're irritating yourself, you're probably what some piano teachers will call thumping. You're hitting the keys too hard and it's too abrasive. So the very first sound we want to get is nice and smooth and quiet. If it doesn't sound the same as when I play it, we will be going through the precise reasons why musical playing is musical playing, why it sounds better when somebody with experience is playing. One thing you may not think of is your piano may be out of tune. Each string on the piano, at least the higher strings on the piano, there are 3 strings for each pitch. This hammer is hitting 3 strings. They need to be the same pitch or it sounds awful. Same with the black keys. It doesn't matter whether a key is white or black on the keyboard. Now, another thing, this is a Walter Grand. Walter makes one of the world-class pianos that's very affordable. In fact, I was recently playing on a $200,000 piano that doesn't have the ring, the bell tone that I like personally, that the Walter does. Some of the sounds, if you play real quiet and smooth, you get this gorgeous sound from good pianos. Most of that you can get with any piano that's in tune. Now, the longer the string, the fuller the sound is going to be, and the better quality the piano is, the better sound is going to be. But a piano that's in tune almost always has a very pleasing sound. Now, if you go on and you're playing harshly, it's not going to sound very good. If you're holding the pedal down the whole time you're playing, you're getting a muddy sound. The pedal has to come up when you change chords. But we will specifically, not just now but later, be going through the reasons why your own playing isn't as pleasing as someone who has more experience. Sometimes it's just relaxing the hands, learning how to play from a relaxed hand position where things can be smoother. When you're tense and tight, you have muscles that are in the way. You're not able to play smoothly and fluently because your tight muscles are actually barring the muscles that should be used. So we will learn how to relax and the other basic principles to get beautiful sounds from these chords. When we start adding smooth rhythms, it's not nearly as difficult as what most people assume. Everyone, children, even at the age of 2, 3, 4 years old, have hundreds of rhythms in their mind. All we have to do is apply the rhythms that we take from language. When I'm working with young students and I ask them to create a rhythm, they always usually say something like, "What do you mean?" And that's a perfect rhythm to start with. What do you mean? Da-da-da-da. So we can play aggressive rhythms because we already know hundreds of rhythms. There's no problem coming up with them. You can play your name. Say it, first name, middle name, last name. Now, don't do long sentences or long phrases or whole paragraphs on the same chord because chords usually change every 3 or 4 beats or so. If you stay too long on the same chord, it becomes intrinsically non-musical. But if you'll take a short phrase of any kind, let's say phrase of any kind. Phrase of any kind. So I'm being a little ridiculous, but it does not matter what words you use, but that gives you a few hundred rhythms to start with right from scratch. We will be expanding how these chords, this simple progression, can be played all over the piano by adding notes that are really from the chord. All kinds of sounds we can get as we amplify this. So we'll go through these chords any way you want to play them for now, and we'll give you some more ideas later.
My observations have led to the firm conviction that much of the time lost in music study could be saved if the elementary training of the student were made more comprehensive and more secure. It is by no means an economy of time to hurry over the foundation work of the student. There is just as much need for the specialist to train the student at the start as there is for the master to guide the virtuoso. I am most emphatically in favor of a more rational, a more broad, and a more thorough training of the beginner. Studies such as harmony, music history, form, and in fact any study which will tend to widen the pupil's knowledge and increase his interest will save much time in later work.
We have promised a chord progression that has an alteration in the chord symbol that's legitimate. The chord symbols of the past and the classical system were too ambitious, we mentioned. They tried to do too much. In fact, they did 3 things that are not necessary to do in chord symbols that we have learned in this century not to try and do. The modern chord symbols have evolved into a practical system. Now, if you'll notice, this is the F major chord, all white keys to get our major in this case. The bass note is going to be altered, and your chord chart will show you the bottom note under the slash is going to be the bottom note in the left hand. Now, this is in the lower register of the piano. What it does, it gives us a more complicated sounding chord with a lot more color and variety. And at the same time, it expands on the texture of the chord, but it's very simple to follow these because the bottom note is specified in the chord symbol. Now let's look at the first one. It's F major with F in the bass, which is normal. That's always allowable. But the next chord goes to a C major chord, which again is all white keys, and E is the bottom note. Now it's right next to the bass note we just played previously when we went from F bass note to E bass note. So you will become accustomed to seeing the chord above the slash and the bass note or low note below the slash in the chord symbol. But it opens up all kinds of variety and a lot more professional sound for our basic chords. This is the B flat major chord. Now we go to B flat minor, which means we just have to change this middle key to go to our dark bright pattern. Between major and minor, really the only difference is that middle key. Back to F major with C in the bass now, as you can see with your cymbals. To D minor with B in the bass. The ending is B flat major, which we've used already, and C in the bass. Now with the free rhythm, which we described a little bit in our last lesson, let me just play the right hand chords, 3 or 4 beats, whatever, and I will play a free pattern in the right hand, and then you'll see when I change the chord. See, I'm changing the rhythm pattern every time I change the chord. I'm doing whatever I feel like doing for approximately the same period of time for each chord. Then the last one, B flat with C. So the chords are really very simple. It's major on F, major chord on C, back to the major chord on F. So far in the chords, it's been all white keys. Until this one, B flat major, which we've already had in our last lesson. And then B flat minor, we'll have the 2 black keys to get our dark, bright intervals. So during this sequence, all of the chords in the right hand are white keys only, except for B flat major and B flat minor, which has 2 black keys in it. That's the new one for this session. So try this with various rhythm patterns. Do our broken patterns. I'm doubling the bass note off of your screen. Now, the musical quality you're hearing now is I'm factoring in a little bit of a surge in the timing. You'll hear me speed up and slow down a little bit, which is allowable for some types of rhythm. Not all types of rhythm, but it's very effective for a free rhythm pattern. It's easy to overdo it. If you try and speed up too quickly or slow down too quickly, it's very unmusical. But if it's done gradually and subtly, it can be very effective. Now listen to the broken pattern now as I start slow, and I speed it up each time I play a chord, in fact. And it slows down again during each chord. So it's actually altering the speed of the broken pattern during each chord. Last example I would like to give you is I'm going to play the bass note and the chord with my left hand, which you won't be able to do till later. And I'm going to play the chord tones as melody tones. And I'm going to make it up as I go. But I will stay within the chord each time. Some of these chords are out of position, but you'll have to trust me that it's exactly the same chord. It's just that I've expanded the skill to the skill that you will have later when you know the chords better, and you can stay with the chord tones even when they're out of position. We call those inversions, where we may not play it with the root note on the bottom. We may play the same 3 tones, but just move the position on the keyboard. So I'm making up the melody as I go. So you can see why composers use chord sequences. They use chord changes to create melodies. Some composers oftentimes will start with a chord progression before they start or create the melody. And even more sophisticated melodies are primarily chord tones, especially on the strong beats. So you don't have to stick with the chord all the time to create a melody. We often go outside the chord, but it's not continual. You have to have chord tones involved in the melody itself in order to make it mesh with the chord. That's why knowing the chords actually outlines all melodies we will run into later. So being skilled at the chords is about 90% or more of the work in terms of the skill necessary to master new melodies, to learn to play new melodies. So I'm staying completely within the chord. I'm just moving it around the piano. And as we get freer and more lively with the rhythm, more, well, smooth with the rhythm, we become skilled at playing chords as though you're playing a melody. You can hardly tell the difference. Now we have a very important exercise for you that has all kinds of implications for your future. Let's look at the chords that we've learned already. This is the D minor chord, and I'm going to add the D on top with my little finger. Now there are some people that can't reach this or block them together, so we will be asking you to break it in that case. And we won't expect you to play them at the same time, but most people can. Now, I have a small hand for a man. I probably have about an average size hand for a woman. But many hands, the real disadvantage on the keyboard is there are some men that have such thick fingers they can't get between the black keys. Really, the size of somebody's hand isn't anything that you can't overcome. Some of the greatest pianists of all time had very small hands. So the real advantage here is that if you can block it, we're going to add the octave of the bottom note of the chord. Now, if I had to pick a skill that I would consider personally the most important skill to have at the keyboard, if I had to limit it to one skill, this would be it. Playing the triad, whether it's major or minor or diminished or whatever, and being able to add the octave up above it, and then to go to the next position of this same chord, which is disguised. It's the same notes. This really forces us to look at the actual keys in the chord. Look at this A minor chord. We have to take a picture of what three keys are in the triad, because that is what we have to stay with in order to execute this challenging pattern. Now I'm going to go to the same notes, but you see, it doesn't look like the same chord. You would think it was some kind of a C chord because C is on the bottom. No, this is an inverted A minor chord. Same three keys as in the A minor chord. It is an A minor chord. It's just out of position. Then again, here it is, but I'm doubling the top note of the triad. In this position, I was doubling the middle note of the triad. This really helps us learn the chords, and we can get some great sounds in the process. Now listen what it sounds like with our random progression on the D minor chord. I'm going to play the run with the D doubled. I'm playing 2 Ds in the right hand. Now I'm going to the next position of it and play the same notes, but now I'm doubling the F. I'm playing 2 Fs. This forces a pair of notes here and a pair on top and a gap in the middle, which is an awkward thing at first, but it's the same 3 notes that are in the triad, and it's important to see it that way. So we call these inversions when they're just leapfrogging, but it's the same keys. Now you can see the chord again. This one's not as disguised as the middle one because this one has the chord up here, and I'm simply doubling the A with the thumb. So if we get good at this, it has 2 huge benefits. We're able to train the hands to play these patterns that arrangers and composers use all the time, and all piano players use these. And we want to get it in the left hand. There is an option on the fingering in that you can put your 3rd finger on the middle note of the triad or your 4th finger. Then outside of that, your 5th finger plays the octave note, the same key doubled, Ds. Now, see if you can move it to the next spot. This is a little bit of a stretching exercise, but it also stretches you mentally to really start to look at what keys are in this particular chord and to be able to move them around the keyboard and still see it and know it as the same chord. It's an extremely valuable skill. Now our goal is to do this with all of the major chords and all of the minor chords. Now we've looked at how they're built, but really there's another advantage to learning all 12 of the major chords. The reason there are 12 is because there are 7 unique white keys, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Now when you get back on A, of course it's going to be the exact same chord as what you played down here. So there aren't more than 12, but there are 12 major chords. The good news is they come in groups. Not only are they structured identical, they're all structured exactly the same with the bright interval on the bottom and the dark interval on top. But they are also in groups according to where the black keys fall. Here's what I mean. A major always has this black key in the middle. Well, D major is exactly the same as that. So now we're at a point where as we make music with them, we will start to notice the 12 different major chords, how the black keys fall. Here's E major, and guess what? It's the same. Now those are the only 3 major chords that all have a black key in the middle, but that's 3 out of the 12 right there. So one color pattern, so to speak, but it gives us 3 chords. Now even easier than that is the C chord. Here's bright, dark, C major, all white keys. That doesn't mean all of the ones that look like that are major, because they're not. But C is major, and F. When you do this same pattern on F, bright, dark, it is a major chord, and it's all white keys. And these never ever change, and we use them so often, especially for playing chord progressions or making music with chords. We repeat them so often that a lot of times in a certain sequence there's only one new chord to learn. Except in the very beginning you might have 2 or 3 to learn to get going. Look at G major. So again, all white keys for G major. So we just learned in, well, it's 2 color patterns. We saw there were 3 major chords with a black key in the middle. And we saw that there are 3 major chords with all white keys involved. C major, F major, and G major. And I'm not asking you to memorize them right now. We'll memorize them as we run across them in chord progressions, making music with them, which is a lot better context to help our memory. Now remember how we had A major with the black key? Well, if we drop all of these a half a step to the very next key, it reverses the pattern. let's look at A flat major. And we'll see it has black on the bottom, A flat, a C in the middle, white key, black key on top, the exact opposite. A major was white, black, white. A flat major, we should say, is black, white, black. Same thing happens with D major. Now we're trying to get all 12 major chords without having to learn 12 unique patterns. So we're looking at them in groups of 3, as it turns out. D major, if I drop it, reverses the color pattern. So the D flat major chord is exactly the opposite. It's black, white, black. It's the opposite of D major. See, they all reverse when you drop them down a half a step. And the same thing happens for E. So learning the E major chord helps you learn the E flat major chord because they're right next door for one thing, but it reverses exactly. The black goes to white and the whites go to black. So there really is a lot of organization beyond the fact that they're built the same in terms of their components or the building blocks we talked about. So it's very organized. In fact, what have we done so far? We've learned 3 major chords had a black key in the middle, which was A major, D major, and E major. Again, you won't really remember that precisely. What I want you to get the point right now is that there are 3 of them that have a black key in the middle. And as we use them, you'll start to remember which ones. Then we have 3 that are white, white, white. All white keys for C major, all white keys for F major, all white keys for G major. So there's half of them right there with 2 color patterns. Then the next 3 we found were the opposite of the chord that had the black key in the center. It was black, white, black. It had a white key in the center. And they're right next to each other. Half steps, very next interval, very next key down. D major does the same thing. It reverses. So the D flat major has the exact reverse color pattern, and E does the same thing from E major. So there's 9 of the 12. So there are 3 left, and it is a group because they're all oddballs. In other words, here is G major. If I go down with all of them, guess what I get? I get 3 black keys, and it's the only major chord that has 3 black keys in it. We could call it G flat major, or we could call it F sharp major. We can name the root either way. But the point is, it's the only major chord with 3 black keys, G flat major, F sharp major, whichever you want to call it. So that's a good oddball to learn. Then there's another oddball. There's a major chord. We've played it earlier. It's one of the first ones we learned, B flat major. It has black, white, white. It's the only major chord that has a black key on the bottom and white keys above it. So we're trying to get a handle on all 12 of them, even though we're not really trying to memorize them right now. Then we have the last oddball. It's the only major chord that's white in the root and has 2 black keys above it. Only B major does that. So the odd ones are actually pretty easy to learn because they're unique. But it's kind of good that all 12 of them that aren't unique, that there are some groups involved. So we had 3 groups of 3. We had 3 major chords that had a black key in the middle. We had 3 major chords that were all white. And we had 3 major chords that had black, white, black. Another point to make that's very important is that since they have the same intervals, the same actual structure, if you look at the bright, dark intervals that we examined before. Now, don't watch the keys I'm playing right now, but I want you to watch my hand itself. I'm going to play all 12 of them, but watch these 3 fingers. Remember, it's bright, dark. Remember, it's actually the same structure. Watch how much my fingers change to get all 12 of them. They don't really change very much. The distance between the fingers is about the same. So, major, they feel about the same. You just make a slight adjustment for the black keys. But you know, it's the same interval, so the distance between these 2 fingers isn't going to change very much as I go down the bright intervals. So So it's important to know that physically they're awfully close. Even though B major has 2 black keys, it's not very different than playing the C major as far as your hand is concerned. So this is our goal, is to be able to play these and add the octave and even recognize them when they're out of position. It's not something you can do right away, but by playing the musical sequence we've outlined that are in the booklet, you can get a handle on each chord one at a time. And you can enjoy the sound that they make when they're put with other chords that go with them. Now we're going to look at an actual chord sequence that teaches you minor to major that is real ambitious. It's really a long-term project. It has all 12 minor chords in it. It has all 12 major chords in it. And we're going to look at that next. Now we are looking at how best to learn the major and minor chords. We're going to focus just for a few minutes on the minor chords themselves and how they too include black keys and how we can actually learn them. Let's look at this minor chord on C, and you'll see that it has a black key in the center. Well, do you remember that there were 3 major chords that had black keys in the middle of the chord? Well, it's the same with minor. C minor has a black key in the center, so does F minor, and so does G minor. So there's a group of 3, and remember, don't try and remember each detail, just get the picture that there are 3 minor chords with black keys in the middle of them. Now let's look and see how they relate to the major chords that we learned earlier. Remember, there were 3 major chords with white keys only? C major was one of them. Well, that's how we get the minor. Only this middle key makes a difference between major and minor. So if you know the major chords, you are just very, very close to knowing all 12 of the minor chords. All you have to do is move a middle key down, and that's why C minor has a black key in it. Same with F major. It was a white major chord, all white keys. Move the middle key down, and you get the F minor with the black key in the middle. Same with G. So that's how we will eventually see these patterns. We will know them individually after we use them enough in context of making music. Now remember how there were 3 major chords that had black keys. This is the bright, dark pattern. Major chord, a black key in the center in order to get major. Well, it's minor. D minor is all white. But see how closely related they are. In fact, the 3 major chords that had black keys in the middle become white minors. So E minor will always be white keys. Let's look at A major. It was the other major chord that had a black key in the center. Well, its minor is going to be all white keys. So these reverse each other, they flip-flop, and if we look at the oddballs, that's a little bit different, but it still comes in groups of 3. There are 3 minor chords that have a white key in the center. And now that you know how to find them by using the dark bright for minor, you'll be able to figure them out as you go. We can't take time to look at each one of them individually because this isn't the best way to actually memorize them or learn them anyway. There's a minor chord that's all black keys, one of them. Remember, we had 3 major chords that were odd. There was only one of its type in terms of where the black keys fall. Remember how we had a major chord that was white, black, black? Well, its minor chord is white, white, black, and it's the only minor chord that does that. 2 white keys with a black key on top. The highest pitch is a black key. And we also had an odd major chord that was black, white, white. Well, its minor is an oddball also. It's black, black, white. Now, some of this, again, many of these things I'm giving to you for future reference. Our eventual goal is to know all 12 major chords without hesitation, so that when we're reading music notation, we can see the patterns. Also, when we're reading by chord symbols, chord charts, we know right where to go when we see a chord symbol, and we know how many black keys are involved and where they fall. That's our eventual goal. But I'm really getting you started by showing you how to build them first. Then, the added point for the last lesson and this lesson is that there is organization when it comes to where black keys are included. There are patterns there also. So the minor chords are very similar to the major chords in that there are groups of three. There's three minor chords that are all white keys. A minor is all white keys. D minor is always all white keys. E minor is always white keys. There are three minor chords that have a black key in the middle, similar to what we had in major. F minor, G minor, and those are really flip-flop of the majors that go with them, which we covered just a few minutes ago. Major to minor. The white major goes to a minor that has a black key in it. The majors that have black keys in them go to white minors. So it's very closely related, so watch for that relationship because that's a real time saver. So let's go now quickly to a chord progression, a chord change that's very musical and it's fun to listen to. This is the kind of thing you would hear in the background in movies. We're going to take a minor chord, then we're not going up to the next root, but we're going to skip a key and build a major chord right above it. So see, the root note was C. We did a minor chord on C. We went up what we call a whole step because we skipped a root key. We didn't build a chord here. We skipped it, went to D and built major. So it's a nice sound. Let's add the bass note, an expanded progression where we can build on this. Here I have two C minor chords in both hands. See the C at the root, minor. It's going to go to D major. This is a good example because it's a minor chord that has a black key in the middle, and it's a major chord that has a black key in the middle. You can kind of see the scenery in the movie as the movie opens. It has kind of a majestic sound, this particular change. Then, in a very organized manner, we're going to go from the D major to the D minor and then do the same type of change. Up a whole step to E major. So now we have D minor to E major. So it's a pleasant sound, but we're going to continue this, and it will help us to cover eventually, and this isn't a one-day project, by the way. We're going to go from E major to E minor, and this is written out in your chord booklet. E minor to F sharp major. All black keys. It's still a major chord. I'm playing it with both hands, and you should be relying on your understanding of the chords, not just what you can see me do. So continue with that one, and what will happen, you will cover half of the minor chords with that and half of the major chords, because after we do a couple more, go to minor here, just figure out your your dark bright. Dark interval first, bright interval for the minor on F sharp, and then the major chord above it. It's one of the major chords that has a white key in the middle, black on the bottom, black on top. Then it goes to minor. The middle key is the only difference. And then to our B flat major. So I'm going really too fast for you to be learning these right now, but it is a sequence you have in your booklet. And what we're more anxious to do now is to show you what I mentioned before, what I consider the most important physical skill to have at the keyboard. If you had to pick one skill to have, what you would want is for your right hand to not just play the triad, but to go ahead and double the root. And again, most people can reach this and block it, but if you can't, always translate to a broken pattern, even if it's a quick one. Some very, very famous pianists had a hard time with the bigger chords. So what they learned to do, and what we learned to do, is instead of blocking it all at the same time, you can get the same effect by just breaking it quickly. Actually, it will add color to your style, so it doesn't hurt anything to be limited in that way. So we're going to build the skill of being able to double, stay on the chord notes, and yet to do the same thing in the next position of the chord. It's the same notes, it's the same triad, but now we're doubling what used to be the middle note of the triad. We're doubling the E flat and still getting the chord notes between it, G and C. Then we do it again here. Now this is such an important skill. It's why a lot of people really never recognize the chord patterns when they see them in music, is because so often we're using these positions, these inversions we call them, instead of just root position chords. So the real key is to learn chords in root position, but then be able to play them in other positions. And adding the octave like this is a great stretch for your hand. Also, we start to add more rhythm as we do this. Next position. And it really makes you look at the chord members. Each key that's in that chord, you have to take a temporary picture. You have to temporarily memorize it. And pretty soon, of course, it'll be permanently memorized. But C minor will always have the same three keys in it. C, E flat, G. So those are the notes you keep in the middle. Here's the G and C in the middle now, and I'm doubling the E flat. Now you can see the chord up here if I take my time and let you see it. And it is the triad, but then the G is doubled here. So again, it's the same notes always, but I'm always doubling one of them with the octave, we call it, when it's the same key, 8 notes apart. It's basically 8 white keys apart. Now we want this skill in our left hand too. It really sets us up. Now I have a hard time with this one because of the size of my hand, but I still practice it mostly for my mind. We're really trying to learn these patterns, even though all the positions aren't that practical for physically playing them. It's still very important because you may see this written in music when you're breaking it. Even though it's quite a stretch, either way you finger it, with the fourth finger on the G or the third finger. I use the third finger. So mentally, to see these patterns mentally is probably more important than being able to play them all physically. But we want to be able to play the C minor chord with the C doubled in the left hand, 2 C's, but it's still the same chord. Then we get the same keys, but now we're doubling another or a different note of the chord. Now we're doubling the G, but still in the middle is C and E flat. If both hands get good at this, and we start to see these patterns mentally, we can't escape them. Everywhere we look in music, we see them all the time. So it's a tremendous time saver. And by the way, this is why some people can sight read music so quickly. They're actually editing. They're seeing patterns. They're probably not getting the pedal markings and the exact fingering. They're probably just seeing patterns as they sight read. And I'm an average sight reader, but I'm often editing as I go. I see chord patterns, so I'm not trying to get all the details. But because I know the chords, you'll never hear a mistake because I stay within the chord pattern. Even though I'm not reading every detail or every single note that the left hand is doing, I'm careful not to go outside of the chord. So that tells you why some people can take brand new music and read it at sight having never seen it before. Most of those people have the ability to see patterns that are familiar to them. And their hands are ready for them too, by the way. So as we go through this, in our next session, we're going to give you some more options on how this is played to make it livelier and a better sound. But remember that the minor chords, the 12 minor chords, are very similar in effect to the major chords in that there are groups of 3 when it comes to where the black keys fall. Another long sentence for you to rewind and play over again. So we'll take off with this. We'll play more interesting sounds with it, and you'll enjoy playing this change. your chord booklet, you have 2 chord progressions, minor to major. Each change within these 2 progressions is a minor chord to a major chord right above it. We're going to look at some musical options so that as we play these, we can make some great sounds, but it'll help us actually learn the chords. Now the first one starts C minor to D major. Again, we said the roots are a whole step apart. We're not going from this chord to the very next key to make a chord, but skipping a key to major. So let's look at some musical options to make this a lot more fun to practice. Our real goal is to play the octave. That is, not just the triad, but we're always going to be doubling one of the notes of the chords. Now we're doubling the C, playing 2 of them. Now we're playing the same keys. There's a big gap between these 2, but we're doubling the E flat. Now we're playing the same keys, but we're doubling the G. This is a skill we want in both hands. It's probably one of the very best skills you can have because it trains your mind to see patterns, not just your hands to play the patterns. You'll see these patterns all throughout the music. You can't get away from them. They're everywhere. So, if we start making some pleasing changes to the ear, what happens is you'll practice longer. You'll spend enough time where you'll actually start learning the members or the individual notes in each chord. And here's one of the ways we do it. Let's play the chord with this hand, and I'm going to play the octave on all 3 notes of this hand. I played 2 C's, 2 E flats. Now I use finger 1 and 4 when I do black octaves because it's more convenient. Your 4th finger is already up there. You can see during this little chromatic run, see my 4th finger is already up there. As I come down or go up the piano, it's easier to play the doubled octaves. We're doing 2 of the same note, same key. And then for the white octaves, finger 5. And if you can't quite reach the octave, just break it, do patterns, and you can pivot a little bit. In fact, pivoting and swinging is very important for the left hand and the right hand at different times, depending on what chord you're playing. There are times when if you're breaking a chord, the easiest thing is to make the wrist flexible, and actually you're pivoting or swinging on these fingers to lengthen your fingers. People with smaller hands have to do this, and in fact, everybody does it. All advanced pianists do it anyway because we'll always go beyond what we can reach in a block chord. Now look at this example. Watch how far I can reach when I'm swinging or pivoting on the fingers. I can go clear down to the G. See, I'm swinging on this key, so it's the same chord, but I'm going clear down to this G. That's way farther than I can reach in a block chord. But that principle can always be employed. You're not cheating. All advanced pianists do this. Otherwise, it limits what you can play. So that frees up the hand. It relaxes the hand. It allows you to play things without the stress and the strain also. So let's go back to the octave pattern. I'm going to play the chord and then play the notes of the chord in octaves. Switch hands, do the same thing. Do the chord change. So we get these big sounds just by developing, by enhancing the chord by playing more of the same note. Now this also will work for aggressive rhythms. D minor to E major, just like it's in your booklet. Next time we go to E minor, all white keys, to a major chord that's all black keys. So if you really look at my hand itself. As I go to this black major chord, there is no change in the distance between the fingers or the hand position. It fits perfectly. So watch for those kind of insights also. this hand mold will give you exactly the right black keys for this black major chord. We could call F sharp major, or we could call it G flat major. Here's E minor. I'm breaking it, adding the octave. Go to minor on the G flat chord. So you know how to build them. It will take time to learn the individual chords, but this is the best way because it sounds good and it's fun to play. Minor to B flat major. B flat major may be a familiar one for you already. A flat minor probably is new. So this gets it becomes a lot of fun when we make it a little more aggressive, or just play it more musically by smooth and even. My left hand has the octave, triad, D major. My right hand is playing the same notes but in one of the inversions. The biggest gap is between these two. Accented the bottom note to give it some bass or to give it a foundation. Those are the subtle things we do to get the musical qualities. So this was really the melody of what the phrase I just played. The other notes were like an echo behind it just to harmonize with it. So this skill of getting the octave in the hands when we're really just playing the simple triad and learning how to move it around the piano. Here's an example of a run where I'd play the same three notes and then end it with the little finger. So same three fingers on the same three keys, C minor. Again it repeats. So it looks fancy when somebody plays it quickly. But for the hand, it's very simple to do. It's the same exact chord in two places. I'm breaking it thumb, finger 2, finger 3, 2 times. And then we go to our chord change, D major. And do the same thing. So these are some of the ideas to add more aggressive rhythms, to develop this skill, and yet hear some music at the same time. So work through this. The other one starts with F minor to G major, and it gives you the other 6 minor chords and the other 6 major chords to learn and to practice, and yet the change sounds good. So don't try and master all of the minor chords and all the major chords in one day, but that's for your future reference, and I hope you enjoy playing it.